Okay, this is a follow-up to the activity that we did in class with the bookbindery. And we're going to look at some of the costs of production. We're going to look at what level we should be producing. We're going to look at what point should we decide to quit producing it all and maybe shut our factory down. We know what the factors of production are: land, labor, and capital. Land are the natural resources, anything that comes from nature. Labor, obviously, is a human resource, the people that you have working for you. And then capital are the buildings, tools, and machines used to produce goods. Once again, marginal means additional. So producers think about the cost of making one more unit of good when deciding how to maximize their profits. How much is it going to cost me to make one more unit, and how much revenue am I going to make by producing that next unit? So labor and output. Marginal product of labor. When we change, is the change in output from hiring one more worker. It measures the change in output at the margin where the last worker has been hired or fired. Once again, marginal means additional. We're going to look at how does our output change when we hire one more worker. And once again, how does our revenue change? And so you can have what's called increasing marginal returns, diminishing marginal returns, and you can also have what's called negative marginal returns. So make sure that you get that in your notes. So as we look at this chart, this is the number of workers. So when we have 0 workers, our total product, or the amount they make, obviously is 0. When we have 1 worker, that first worker made 3. When we add an additional worker, that second worker, we want to know what the difference is, what the marginal product is. And so when we go from 1 to 2 workers, that's a difference of 1. We go from 3 to 8. That's a difference of 5. So the marginal product, or the additional output that second person made, was 5 units. When we go from 2 to 3 workers, we go from 8 to 14. So that third worker added an additional 6 units of product. When we go from 3 to 4, our total product goes from 14 to 19, and so that fourth person added 5. When we go from 4 to 5 workers, we go from 19 to 23 total product, and look what's happening. This number is going down. Total product is going up, which means we're actually increasing, but by adding additional workers, they're not adding as much as the worker before them. Until eventually, if we added a 9th and a 10th and 11th worker, our productivity might actually start, in terms of what that additional worker is adding, might start to go negative. So this is the amount of workers, this is your input, this is the output, this is the total output. And marginal means when we add one more worker, what does that worker add? And so the formula for calculating marginal product is the change in output, we find the change here, 5, divided by the change in input. So this is a change of 1. So 5 over 1 is 5. The change here is 6. The change here is 1. So 6 over 1 is 6. Average product, all we're doing is saying, on average, how many are each of our workers making. So if we have one worker making 3, then on average he's making 3. If we have 2 workers making 8, on average each one of them is making 4. If we have 3 making 14, on average they're each making 4.67. So you can see what happens is when we have 8 workers, on average each one of them is making 3.64. But what's happening here is our productivity with each worker is decreasing, and this is because what happens is we're not changing any of the other factors of production. We're not adding any more machines. And so what you have are, you're adding more people to fixed resources. Eventually they're going to kind of stand around. They're going to start talking to each other. There's not going to be enough for them to do. So we're going to actually see our productivity diminish just because the only thing that we are changing here is the number of workers that we have. So we have a situation here when marginal product is increasing, it's called increasing marginal returns. We are getting an increasing return for every person that we hired. Then when we get into this yellow part, what we have is called diminishing marginal returns. As we add an additional worker, that next worker, we're still adding to the total product, but what they add is not as much as the worker before them. So if all the other factors are remaining constant, if we're not changing any of the other factors of production and all we are doing is adding labor, hopefully you saw that from the activity. Everyone wants more staplers and everyone wants more scissors because we're running out of things for people to do. So productivity is actually going to start to diminish, and eventually we will add so many workers where our productivity will actually decrease. So marginal returns in the short run. We have increasing marginal returns, and we just saw that. When we add an additional worker, that additional worker actually increases total production more than the worker before them. Then we enter into diminishing returns, where an additional worker actually increases our total product, but not as much as the worker before. And then we can actually see negative marginal returns. An additional worker actually decreases total product. In each of these, you are increasing labor while all of the other factors remain constant. And what that's called in economics is the short run. When labor's contribution is positive at first because we're seeing an increase of total product, but then it starts to slow down and it starts to diminish. And then we get to the point where if all we're doing is adding more workers, we're actually going to start seeing negative returns. In the long run, what we deal with is called returns to scale. And basically what that means is in the long run, none of the factors of production are fixed. So if we get to the point where we are seeing diminishing returns and we're afraid we're going to enter into what's called negative returns, then what we might want to do if the demand for our product is still great is that we would want to increase the scale of our business. We might want to add on to the building. Then we're going to bring in new equipment. And then we can start hiring people again. We can start hiring more labor. So in the long run, all of the factors of production are being changed. And what we see there, it's called returns to scale. So if we increase the overall size of our business, and that's all of the factors, land, labor, and capital, we can see in the beginning our costs are actually going down, and this is called increasing returns to scale or economies of scale. When your costs go down, the more you produce, that's a good thing. Your profits are going to go up. Then we get to the point where we might see what's called decreasing returns to scale, where our costs actually start to go back up. And you can also get what's called constant returns to scale. And we'll do that math in class.